All right, we're going to get started. Calling up House Bill 1. We have the bill sponsor, Delegate Crosby. Delegate Crosby, please go ahead when you're ready and they turn your mic on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Brian Crosby here to present House Bill 1, which is really at its core a consumer protection bill measured to designed to lower utility bills and really prioritize our ratepayers over executives. HB 1 prohibits investor-owned energy companies from using customer rates to pay for executive bonuses or compensate executives over 110% of the PSC commissioner's salary. HB 1 also requires energy companies to institute policies limiting non-essential expenditures while excluding employees covered by a collective bargaining agreement. We're all getting hammered with calls, texts, emails from our constituents, and I would venture to guess right now, besides what is happening federally, this is the #1 issue, I think, on most people's plates, certainly from a pocketbook perspective. I can give you one example. Miss Dorothy, who is a mentor of mine, she lives in the 46th district where my in-laws live. And right now, she is having conversations on whether or not she can afford insulin or pay her utility bill. And that doesn't factor in probably the bill she's going to get next month because of the freezing cold and the winter storm that just happened. And so we brought the bill. This is not the first time a bill like this has been brought or passed. It has passed in a different state. And additionally, there is a bipartisan effort at Congress right now for a very similar provision. I tried to think through, I know that energy is newer to this committee, I tried to think through some of the opponents' arguments. And really, I think it can kind of boil down to a few things. The first, they may say they'll prioritize contractor labor over their own in-house people. But frankly, this goes back to a bill we passed either last year or the year before. We took away retrospective reconciliation. And so I don't really foresee them doing that as a long-term plan. It wouldn't be in the best interest of the utility to do that. I think also they'll probably make a play for retaining talent, or they can't attract talent, but nothing in the bill limits how they were to pay for an economist or an engineer. They can just pay them up front, and the PSC can determine whether or not that's reasonable. Additionally, they can still give a bonus. We just cap what that bonus could be, and frankly, I think the cap, you know, there could probably be some dynamics or debate around where the limit is, but it's really aimed to get at the massive executive salary. Keep Exelon companies in mind when you do this. You know, instead of, they have BGE, they have Pepco, and then you have big Exelon, right? But if you were to compare that to First Energy, for example, they just have one corporate entity. They don't have all these subsidiaries. So you don't have multiple layers of CEOs getting larger bonuses or disproportionate bonuses in that example that First Energy uses. And then I think probably the last thing they may say is, you know, we don't regulate private industry in this type of way. And we regulate private industry all the time. Trust me on that one. I think many people can remember me last year. But B, they have a monopoly. And we granted that monopoly because it's in the best interest of the public. And so while it is a private industry, it's a public utility, and the interest is in the public. So with that, I think the last thing they will probably say, or maybe say, is that it targets the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, and there's probably a fair argument and a debate for the committee on that, whether or not you want to expand it. But again, you know, having had the subject matter for a little while, like that's a debate that I think will be fair to be had in subcommittee and for the whole committee. But I encourage everyone to look at a couple other amendments. PERG submitted an amendment The OPC has some drafting language, and the other thing you might want to touch on is just around the bonus language itself. Maybe you want to tighten that up. I know this from my own personal experience and from, obviously, the utilities, is if there's an inch, they'll figure out how to ram a truck through it, and they're pretty good at it. But with that, HP 1 does not prohibit utility companies from offering bonuses, incentives to their employees, and instead, it ensures that ratepayers are not required to subsidize excessive executive compensation. We ask you for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Crosby. You're a SMECO guy. I think I'm a PEPCO guy. They submitted testimony that said no other state does this. They repeat that multiple times. But you said another state has done this. Can you just tell me what state that was?
Yeah, we pulled it out of, I believe, Colorado is where we got the language from.
Great. So this is not groundbreaking. Other states have already started doing this.
No, my understanding is that provision passed, and that's kind of where I got the testimony from.
Terrific. We have a question from Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Delegate. Thanks for your longtime leadership on utility and energy issues. I guess I have a question about the scope of the bill. You mentioned that this would preclude the rate basing of executive bonuses, but to me, it's not clear as to whether it's just limited to, say, C-suite executives or all supervisors that are working at a company, because there's language in here that defines supervisors. It sort of says that supervisory bonuses are excluded from being rate-based as well.
Yep, so I think that where you get into the C-suite argument is tied to the 110%, right? That's kind of where we are. I think the bill contradicts itself. It does say supervisory, and then later it goes on to say employee, officer, or executive. You probably want to make those two sections consistent with each other. If I was just to kind of think through it myself, the second is probably a little bit better, right? You probably want to make it employee, officer, or executive in both spots so the bill is consistent and then it rolls up to everybody. But I highly doubt some of these managers at the front line are going to get 110% bonus of the PSE salary. And so really I don't think that it's necessarily as targeted or is aimed at those individuals rather than the C-suite folks. It will have an impact on them, but not as much as the higher end earners or the C-suite executives.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I could just follow up. So Delegate, you were saying that you, regardless of how sort of it's written right now, you would recommend that the prohibition on rate basing bonuses apply to supervisors as well as executives?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Ziegler.
Mr. Chair, two quickies if I can. I just want to be sure I'm understanding this correctly. So they can pay their executives whatever they want to pay them. They just can't charge ratepayers for doing it, right? It has to come out of their profits.
Correct.
But you're not, okay, thank you. And the other thing is, were you able to estimate any kind of, at what kind of reduction in a bill
So
somebody would see?
let me come back to the first question you had a little bit. It's kind of a myth, right? They're still going to be able to bonus. They just can't bonus an exorbitant amount, and then it would go out of profit or bottom line,
Okay,
right?
right.
Second, I think it's twofold. I mean, by estimations, it depends on which service territory you're in. It may not be, it's not going to save people hundreds of dollars, one, but even if it is a small change, it's still a message that we're not allowing our ratepayers to subsidize exorbitant bonuses. So I think that it's a caveat. If I had to guess, maybe less than $5 on a bill. But $60 a year to different people means different things.
It's a start, certainly. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Ziegler, I know they're going to come up, but BGE submitted testimony, acknowledges there would be a reduction to ratepayers, and they have a number in there that you can take a look at. Delegate Baker.
My question was answered. Thank you, Delegate Ziegler.
Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for bringing the bill. My first question is, I'm thinking of the BGE victims group. And I think those folks think a lot about, you had a bill that removed competition from the market, but what leads you to attribute you mentioned it in the first part of your testimony, the cost of a person's energy bill, and that these types of expenditures are attributed to that. What leads you to believe these types of cost recoveries through rates is attributable to people's increasing bills?
I mean, where else are they getting the money from?
Well, I think if you're asking us to pass the bill, I mean, is it $1? Is it $1 a month? You know, we've just heard most of these prices are set by the PSC. And the problem with the bill is none of this is even very binding. Like if you read the wording of it, nothing, how do you require a board of directors to set reasonable cost limitations? Like, what does that even mean?
Well, I mean, when the company, the utility, brings their rate plan in front of the PSC's job is to determine if they're justified in reasonable rates. I mean, that is all part of the process.
I was trying to get to that attributable piece. Let me ask a subsequent question. They've done this in Connecticut, is that correct?
I thought it was Colorado. I'm almost positive it was Colorado. I can confirm that for you, though.
I've been told that in Connecticut, the credit was downgraded for the utility. Do you know if that's true or not?
I don't know how these two things are combined or in conjunction with each other. They don't have to be tied to each other because somebody capped utility compensation or utility executive compensation does not mean you automatically get a downgrade in rating. They have nothing to do with each other.
Okay. I think I have one final question. So it seems like a lot of this, like asking how you're setting cost limitations on entertainment and events. I'm all for that. But how do you actually, it seems like it's some kind of accounting mechanism that we actually need to prove, you know, attribute the actual accounting of all this to verify that it's happening. How does the bill allow for that?
The PSC will be up here, and you can ask them that exact question, how they go through.
In your mind, how does that happen? You are the bill sponsor.
It would go through the PSC process of verifying the company during their rate plan and what they're trying to recover for during the rate proceeding.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, thank you so much for bringing this bill. And I want to ask a question, and I'm angling it because I understand what you're trying to do, and it's very important in this day and time. So I'm asking from this angle because there have been thoughts that perhaps if we sneak in other ways, well, not sneak in, if we introduce other ways in for utility companies to be transparent and show forth what they are, what they're not doing, that they can find other ways to increase their rates. Do you think that this would have that effect through this bill, that they would find a way to increase rates another way?
With or without the bill, they're going to figure out a way to increase or pad their number because they get a return on the larger number.
Okay.
I mean, that's how it exists. To be clear, I don't hate the utility for that, right? Like, I get that part of the business, but this bill has nothing to do with that.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. I mean, really, really thank you. My question is, and maybe this can't be addressed in this bill. Did you give any thought to like stock options and like future payments that might come along, future perks as a result of CEO pay and so forth?
So short answer is yes. That is kind of what I was referring to when I started talking about bonuses, is like you might want to tighten that language to be stock options, deferred 401ks, buyback. Like there are a whole host of things that if you just say bonuses, I've been around this long enough to know, like, okay, they may just take that to be a dollar for dollar, right? But instead of giving somebody $1.5 million in cash, they'll give them $1.5 million in deferred stock options, and they circumvent the rule or the law or the spirit of the law, and you get around it. That's what I was kind of tying it into on the bonus piece. So yeah, that definition probably, and I've sort of known that from the start. I would tighten that.
Okay. So that's your recommendation to this committee, that we tighten that?
I'm not, it's in your hands, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so we could tighten up the definition, or we could treat it as a flexible definition for the PSC to enforce, right? Yeah.
Either way, we just got to get it on the record, so I'm with you.
Okay, I mean, it's written pretty broadly, so it could apply to lots of different things that you were just naming. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, good to see you, sir.
Get that a lot today.
Just a question or two. We, the General Assembly has created the PSC through legislation. We have, the PSC is staffed by, expert staff, expert commissioners, one of whom is, our former chair, who I'm very fond of at the PSC there. So typically, these kinds of things, these sort of rate-setting behaviors tend to be the purview of the PSC and in that ballpark there. This bill would effectively put some rate-setting behaviors in the General Assembly's hands. Do you think that that's a good practice for us to do here? And if so, obviously you do because you've introduced the bill, but also in the future, I mean, should we be setting rates in other ways in the future here, or should we leave that to the experts at the PSC?
I'll start by saying I have had a great relationship with the PSC. I hope everybody in a minute is going to get to meet Ben Baker, who's one of the best minds in the entire state. I don't know if he's blushing back there or not, but he's fantastic. But make no mistake what the relationship is. We set the policy. They enforce it. That's the relationship. And a lot of times what you will find is, and this is not a shot at them, but if we don't spell it out, they just throw up their hands. And so, yes, I think this is absolutely appropriate. This is something that happens multiple times a year, which this committee will become very familiar with here very soon. We are the policy body. We set the policy. This is 1,000% in our purview, in our jurisdiction, and what we do. And for this committee, you're going to do it multiple times over a 90-day session.
Yeah, and Doug, I'm not questioning that there with you. You're absolutely right. This is definitely in our purview to do so. The broader question, though, for me is if we should get into the bigger business here of really reaching in and setting rates, or if we should allow the PSC to do that like we've created them to do. That's really the question that I'm asking.
You're not setting a rate. You're setting a policy. We're not setting a rate.
It has an impact, though, ultimately on rates, right?
What you're going to do multiple times every 90-day session.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And again, Delegate Crosby, this bill has a pretty broad definition of bonus that the PSC will have to interpret and implement, right? So they're still going to have plenty of implementation runway. Okay.
Exactly, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Boyce?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Delegate Crosby. On those lines, Delegate Naraki was speaking up. I'm looking at the PSC's testimony, and as I'm reading through it, they're essentially saying that, they establish precedent. Their established precedent is to disallow utility recovery of employee bonuses in rates if the compensation incentivizes the attainment of financial goals that benefit shareholders rather than ratepayers. But if I'm hearing you correctly, and I can go on reading through this, but it sounds like they're saying that the PSC could be approving these recoveries, this utility recovery, if somehow said bonus is linked to some type of savings or reliability or customer service. And I guess I'm wondering, what would that look like? Like you got a new customer, so you get, $500. Like what would that actually look like? Because that is a little concerning to me.
So I haven't seen their testimony.
That's fair.
Right. But, you could say how many times there's been outages. And if they meet that mark, then they've attained some performance goal that could trigger the bonus, right? So they could probably lay out a whole host of metrics. In fact, not that Exelon probably wants me to read this, but I have their compensation plan. Right, so I know it's in here somewhere, but it basically lays out those performance metrics, and if they hit those, then they can essentially recover, or they've quote-unquote earned their bonus.
So they're essentially saying that their bonuses to them are justified because it's linked to a performance of service that essentially we pay for?
Yeah, I mean, any kind of compensation, for the most part, we're going to pay for as ratepayers, right? I mean, that's labor is part of the rate proceeding, right? And there's a whole host of other things, whether it's in-house or contractor labor, that all kind of go through the PSC for a rate proceeding. But yeah, I mean, they're going to recover whatever those salaries are. They just have to be justified and reasonable, right? And so I'm trying to figure out exactly what the target or performance targets are for theirs. But yes, I mean, they could go to the PSC, who will be here to brief, probably information only at the end, that can kind of, here you go. So they can, I mean, they can go through what that is, and then, or what that criteria is, and then if it meets said criteria, you know, they were expecting 5 brownouts and they only had 3, great job, here's your bonus of whatever that amount of dollars is. I would think that's how that runs through. But I would ask the PSC that.
Right, but with your bill, what we're saying is that they could still do that through the PSC and get that, what they call an evidentiary record of each use that comes before the commission can be reviewed. We're just saying that they can't get as much,
Correct.
but they still could get recovery for performance metrics that they have met, but we're just capping, like lowering it by whatever amount. And because I'm not even sure what.
It's 110% of the PSC commissioner salary. But yes, that's exactly what the bill is, right? It's like there's a cap now. So if the CEO of one of them makes $1.2 million, I bet you his performance metric is 150% of that. And so if they have 3 brownouts versus 5 brownouts, then he or she will get another 1.5 million on top of that and make 2.7. The other way to do this is they just say, hey, his salary or her salary is 2.7 million, and justify that. So there's not any kind of bonus. I mean, I don't know, that would be a question for the PSC if they could bring it in, but that's.
Increase salary generally.
Right, and then just be transparent about it.
Okay.
I don't know if it works like that. That's a question, though, that I would ask Ben and the PSC.
From the PSC. Okay, thank you.
Great. And Delegate, there's actually a couple of different ways they could continue to do this kind of compensation. One, they can do it up to that certain level, as you were just saying, and 2, they can just pay for it not out of rate recovered dollars.
Yeah, exactly. It can come out of profit. There's nothing that says they can't.
I do not see any other questions. Thank you for being here, and I want to congratulate you on that legislative bucket list item of having HB1. You always know it's an
There it
important
is.
speaker
Appreciate the
priority when
viewing.
it's HB1. So great to see you, Delegate. We will call up a panel of favorable and favorable amendment witnesses. We have Emily Scar from Maryland PERG and her assistant, Jennifer Bevan Dangle from Economic Action Maryland Fund, and David Latt from the Office of People's Counsel.
Oh, hi. Sit there.
Please go ahead when you're ready.
No, David's gonna go. Second.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Guyton, and members of the committee. David Latt for the Office of People's Counsel. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and testify favorable with amendments. Unlike competitive businesses, utilities are monopolies with state-granted exclusive franchises and are subject to what the Maryland Supreme Court has said is pervasive state regulation over rates, operations, and service. And that regulation occurs through legislation like the committee is considering today, as well as regulation by the PSC. And the law requires the utilities to operate in the public interest, and this bill advances that public interest by giving the commission explicit instructions to limit excessive executive compensation. The regulation of public utilities represents the state's most potent exercise of its police powers. The only limitations on the state's ability to regulate utilities are the constitutions of Maryland and the United States, and nothing in this bill impermissibly intrudes on the state's ability to regulate rates. I want to deviate from my prepared comments a little bit to address some of the questions, but we are looking at a bill that codifies existing commission precedent, under which utilities are not allowed to recover through rates incentive pay that is not tied to performance. And it would codify it and expand it in important ways. And we've proposed some amendments that would address some of the issues and questions that were raised, and you can see our amendments attached to our written testimony. I wanted to emphasize that we litigate these issues before the commission, and these are important costs, but they are relatively small costs. So when we put on evidence, our office puts on evidence and testimony in rate cases. This is not something that we're able to put a lot of time and intention into, and so this bill would help for that. I wanted to just mention that these costs aren't rate-based. They are recovered on a dollar-for-dollar basis as an operational expense, because I think the utilities will say we don't rate basis, but every dollar is recovered in rates and approved by the commission. I have some other comments,
Yeah, we're gonna, sorry,
but I'll stop here. Yep. Thank you. We asked for a favorable report.
Hello again. Again, I'm Emily Scar, Maryland PERG Senior Advisor. As private companies, utilities have every right to pay their executives whatever they see fit. However, as state-granted monopolies, there should be reasonable limits on how much of these salaries and bonuses they can pass on to ratepayers. Tying the recommended cap to the salary of the Public Service Commission. Whoa, girl. Whew. K-pop demon hunters get you going. Tying the recommended salary cap to the salary of public service commissioners enables utilities to hire qualified leaders with issue expertise and managerial experience to serve as executives to meet the needs of ratepayers, and allowing them to pay salaries above that threshold with shareholder profits gives them the flexibility to recruit talent seeking above that pay as they see fit. As you've heard, Marylanders are facing rapidly increasing gas and delivery rates, particularly from the Exelon-owned utilities. And we're seeing rates go up without seeing benefit. So the best way to prevent future rate hikes is to rigorously review the prudency of all spending and disincentivizing wasteful spending to ensure that only prudent costs are being recovered through rates. The legislature has a critical role to play in that as a partner to the PSC by giving them clear statutory authority to reject excessive and imprudent recovery. And this bill just does just that by codifying PSC additional authority to make executive pay more accountable to consumer benefits. We've shared, as the delegate mentioned, some additional language you could look at to even further strengthen and clarify this, to make sure that executive pay is more accountable to those benefits. So we respectfully request a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bevan Dangle. I am the Deputy Director for Economic Action Maryland Fund, so no roosters today. We are here in strong support of HB1. Economic Action Maryland Fund has 2 direct outreach programs, but one is specifically targeting very low-income older adults, particularly in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, but also throughout Maryland. Our conversations with those seniors that we provide assistance to mirror the complaints, the calls, the emails that you are getting from your constituents. People are having to choose between energy bills and their groceries. They're having to choose between energy bills and their medicines. And this is acutely felt by our senior population. We take some umbrage at the thought that even if it's a $5 a month savings, that's somehow not worth it or of value. These are individuals who are on fixed incomes, who are on incredibly low incomes. $60 a year is a week of essential groceries for one of our clients. So please do not let the utility companies tell you it's not enough of a savings to be worthwhile. And just to speak to some of the questions that we heard, this builds on legislation that was passed last year. This legislature sets the parameters for the PSC to enforce. We were very proud to support the pieces of the energy package last year that restricted some of the ratepayers read like recuperation around airfare, around trade association dues, and cumulatively, as this legislature looks at what is appropriate and what isn't, these smaller bites of the apple start to add up to, again, what is to our clients an incredibly significant savings. Colorado passed their law in 2023. It is still too soon to get very robust analysis because that's fairly recent. But the initial results are showing that ratepayers are seeing a significant savings to their rates because of the efforts that are being made there. And there are other states where this debate is happening at the PSC level. In Minnesota and in Illinois, we are seeing the debate take place at that level, and it's much harder to know which way that should go. So the state setting the parameters is very important. Thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question from Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions. I'll keep it brief. What does this do beyond what the PSC already does?
The bill, the PSC looks at whether the costs are tied to utility performance. What is often not addressed in rate cases is the actual size of that performance or size of the compensation. In other words, if it's tied to performance, the pay can be excessive anyway, and this would put a cap on that. So
does it?
Does it impose a cap? Yes, the cap, the Public Service Commission chair is the highest paid employee. This cap would be somewhere above $250,000, which is a significant compensation, and it would cap it at somewhere above $250,000.
So I actually, look, if this is a matter of policy, I'm all in. But the question is, how do you attribute this? Like, how do you attribute these costs to the cost of people on fixed incomes?
Well,
how does that translate?
These costs are directly passed through in utility rate cases on a dollar-for-dollar basis. So the utility collects those costs in utility rates. So customers are actually paying these costs. They're approved by the Public Service Commission. But what I was trying to get across earlier is that it's because we deal with hundreds of millions of dollars of costs in rate cases, it's very, these costs themselves are not likely to get a lot of scrutiny in the rate case. There is commission precedent saying that the bonuses have to be tied to serving customers.
Right.
So that's already in the law. This would codify that, which we think helps because that could change, and it's important guidance for the commission, but it would set that overall cap, which is a very high cap.
I'm trying to suss out the difference, but I'll yield. Thank you.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Mr. Lapp, I'm going to go back a little bit to when we had our discussion a couple days ago. Can you give me any ideas on, from your point of view, what kind of tools could be considered ideas to help reduce costs along the way that helps the taxpayers out that falls within your authority?
Well, we're the customer advocates, so we don't set rates. We advocate. I mean, our job responsibility is to advance evidence, for example, at the commission in these cases to push back when we think costs are higher than they should be. We certainly don't disagree with all utility costs. You know, they need to spend some on infrastructure. But once the commission approves a lot of costs in rates, it's very hard to pull that back. There's constitutional law behind those approvals that affects, the ability of the state to pull back costs for investments that have been previously approved. But rates are continuing to go up because, in particular, the Exelon utilities in the state have very aggressive infrastructure spending programs. So certainly we should stop digging that hole by curbing excessive spending. One thing that could be done, in addition to putting limits on excessive executive pay, is to lower the utilities' return on equity. We think that's very, very high, and that would be a way to, reduce rates quickly over, in a much shorter time period. So, I mean, those are some quick ideas, but it's very hard. Our office has been, I caught the end of the last briefing, our office has been highlighting the spending on gas infrastructure. It's Stride, but it's also other gas infrastructure, and it's also electric infrastructure that we think is excessive. A utility is incentivized, unlike a competitive business, a utility is incentivized to build more, to replace things before they need to be replaced, not to defer expenses. As a homeowner, if you need to replace your roof, or you're thinking you need to replace your roof, you're planning to do it 1 year, but then you have something else go wrong, you need to replace something in your kitchen, maybe you push that roof back because it's okay another year. Competitive businesses do that all the time. Utilities don't have that same incentive. And if they want to get, gold-plated shingles, if they can get the commission to approve that, they'll get gold-plated shingles. So we need to reduce that spending.
Okay, then we also discussed rate of return. And when the PSC and I were discussing, you discussed it, the PSC thought the 9 to 10% return was reasonable. You guys, I believe, disagreed on that.
Yes, we do disagree. We think it should be substantially reduced. Those estimates of 9 to 10%, they're basically circular. They're looking at other utilities, and they're able to sort of look at one another and point at each other to, increase those rates of return. In reality, what we should be doing is looking at objective benchmarks of returns for competitive companies, which are much lower, as low as 5 to 6%. And, those should be the benchmarks, but then they should be reduced from that because utilities are not high-risk businesses. They are very low risk because they're regulated, they're assured the opportunity to earn their return. So they have these franchises that protect them from competition, which makes them low risk. So those 9 to 10% we think are too high. And, we advocate for lower returns. They've been lowered just slightly in recent years, but we think they're still way too high relative to competitive benchmarks that you look at from academic institutions, banks, and investor.
Well, then that's what kind of customer incentives would you look at that provide lower utility rates, not the consequence of capital spending alone?
Well, there's a long history of constitutional law. Utilities do provide important benefits by providing the capital to build that infrastructure. And so we rely on them to have, to provide the capital to build that out. And under the takings clause of the U.S. Constitution, they're entitled to an opportunity to earn an appropriate return. And that appropriate return is supposed to be for business, consistent with businesses with comparable risks. And utilities are low risk, and yet their rates of return are much higher than that. So their incentive, of course, is they have exclusive franchises, and they're subject to regulation. We don't need to incentivize them. The legislature does not need to provide them incentives. The legislature can tell them, and the PSC can tell them what to do. They have obligations that are set forth in the law. They don't need other incentives.
Okay, then my last question is, on that rate of return, we have dividends and yields. Do you have any idea how much money the Maryland pension system has invested in these utilities? And taking it a step further, if you reduce and take that profit out of bottom line, how would that possibly affect the pension system buying into the bonds and affecting, per se, Maryland retirees who depend on that income?
To directly answer, I'm not sure what the pension system, I don't have that information, but at least offhand. But I can tell you that investors appreciate low-risk investments. A higher-risk investment, you go to your financial planner, depending on your age and your goals, you may opt for higher risk investments or lower risk investments. This is a low risk investment. So if somebody is looking for, to win big like the lottery, they may not invest in a utility, but there are a lot of people out there who want, low risk investments. And with a lower return on equity, there is no question that the utilities would still be able to raise sufficient capital to serve customers.
No, but I get that part, but I'm just saying, if you would have a portfolio, the state has a huge retirement portfolio, and there's millions of dollars invested in these bonds, and the retirees are looking for stability, and let's say, I'm using numbers, say it's 6%, and then because of this, it lowers it to 5.25%. Then all of a sudden, the retirees are losing 0.75% on some possible retirement income that they're fixed on, per se, for their own well-being, where they've invested in our system, and simultaneously, now they're asking our system to pay them back a fair share, even if it's 6 or 5.25, but 0.75% on whatever could be a considerable amount of money, and I have no idea how much a person gets to retire for the system. So that's just the overriding question.
Yeah, I think we would support substantial reductions in the return on equity, but with the idea of getting them down in the range they should be, which is probably 5 to 6%. And it depends on the markets, but not necessarily jumping to that point, because it does impact existing shareholders. But new shareholders, those who purchase stock going forward, they'll expect whatever the rate of return or the return on equity that the commission sets. So I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think the fairness issue is to the existing shareholders, and for that reason, maybe you don't jump from 9.5% to 5.5%. Maybe you go down, from 9.5 to 7.5, or in that range, so that you don't dash those, hit as hard those existing shareholders. But certainly there are people who want to invest and are satisfied with a much lower return on equity than the utilities are getting.
Thank you.
Delegate Baker.
Thank you. So my question would be, so if this bill passed and it's implemented and it moves forward, could you come back here in 1 year and tell me in a dollar amount how much my constituents are going to save on their utility bill?
The utilities have, some estimates, but we often, when utilities put out numbers, we often have big questions about them because they usually don't provide, the underlying analysis.
No, my question is, could you come back and show me on a bill how much my constituent saved on their utility bill?
We could do.
It's been my experience that.
Yes.
And I've been around a little bit.
Yeah, our office could do that, and it would depend on, because this bill will only be implemented when the utilities come in for a rate case. So right now, PEPCO is proposing, a 23% on average, distribution rate increase. And so if this bill were applied to PEPCO's rate case, and we would, and limit that compensation, I think we probably could come back with a specific number.
Yeah, I'd like to see a number for decrease or increase in my utility bill. May I ask another question? Okay, so another question I would have, and I can envision this happening, so when utility companies lose bonus-deserving employees to utility companies in other states, DC, wherever. So that means the utility company, they're going to have to advertise, hire, train new employees for replacements. So the cost that they would incur for, to hire, train, advertise for new employees, can that cost for the new hires be recovered through rates?
Potentially, and I'd say the point here isn't to compete with other utilities, and hopefully more states consider legislation like this, because what we're trying to do.
My question is.
Yes, some of those costs are able to be requested to be recovered, it's up to the PSC how much they think is reasonable for advertising, for example, for jobs. That's one of the requirements in here, that they set reasonable limits on it. But the whole intent of the legislation, and I think the language in it is pushing the PSC to be I don't want to say aggressive, but strict in using their authority to reject excessive spending, whether it's on specifically on executive pay, but also other frills, including advertising, events, PR. And so the idea is to drive down those costs. And, hopefully a utility, if they really want to pay more, as you said, they can still pay people whatever they want. It's just how much they can recover.
Well, I understand that. I just don't anticipate my bill going.
Yeah, well, and I share your frustration, and we're not trying to be evasive on some of the costs. It is hard. Like, I can't go and find how much BG&E is getting paid this year. A lot of that is very complicated to get through, and it's hard for legislators, it's hard for the public to understand. So one of the things we're trying to do with this bill is make that more out front. And I do think we can get back information in a year or two when a utility goes in for a new rate case after this law is passed to demonstrate what they requested and what was rejected.
Thank you.
And Delegate Vicky, you should check the BG&E testimony, because they did the math, and you can ask your utility to do the same math, and they can show you what the effect would be. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Panel, good to see you. Mr. Lapp, it's good to see you. You and I have had good conversations before about these issues, so I'm glad that you're here. I've read your testimony in detail, and it kind of spurred a thought process along the lines of Delegate Baker. So last year, the General Assembly passed a bill to limit things like, corporate jets and things like that. Part of the rationale that we were told to do that was that it would have an effect, a positive effect on our rates, that our rates would go down as ratepayers. Well, the only thing that I've seen happen is, one, my rates have skyrocketed at my house. Not only have they skyrocketed at my house, but so much so there was a news story the other day about a church in my area of eastern Baltimore County that had a $34,000 electric bill, their most recent bill, right? So I know you're a very smart man, and I know that you understand that correlation and causation are not always the same thing here, right? So what happens if this bill is passed and rates somehow actually skyrocket even more? Would it be the fault of passing this legislation? Could this legislation then be the fault of that? Just like possibly passing that legislation last year was partly to blame for rates skyrocketing even more this year?
No, I mean, the bills aren't going to skyrocket or, go down significantly, to be clear, as a result of this bill. Or likely even the jet costs. I mean, those are real costs that flow through. They go into the utility's revenue requirement, which is then, essentially divided up among ratepayers and shows up in bills. But these are relatively small costs compared to the big infrastructure spending on, pipes, wires, substations, all the tens and hundreds of millions of costs. So your bills aren't going to go up or down significantly, but anything that reduces that revenue requirement is going to have a small effect to reduce the bill. And what this does, to the extent that there are utility employees, executives that are earning compensation above the cap, and this limits that cap, it will reduce that revenue requirement, and there will be a modest effect to reduce the costs of the utility that flows through to customers.
Sure. So Mr. Lapp, then if this is not going to radically change my bill one way or the other, up or down, committee time, chamber time is precious during a 90-day session. Wouldn't it make more sense then for us to be focusing our efforts on some of the things like you're talking about, like the golden water cooler effect that you can see with monopolies like this, instead of taking small bites at the apple here that really may not even have an impact, could theoretically even have a negative impact on my bill. So wouldn't that make more sense to be targeting those things that can have broader impacts to ratepayers than things like this that could be marginal at best?
Well, I don't think it's going to increase bills for one, but and generally I agree. I think there are bigger ticket items for the General Assembly, but the utilities are obligated to operate in the public interest, and utility executives making salaries in the neighborhood of 260, 270, 100,000 a year, that's not in the public interest when customers are hurting, and most customers make substantially less than that. So I think it's an important message to send, but I would generally agree with your premise that there are more important things or bigger ticket items, I should say, to address.
Thank you.
And Delegate Naraki, as you know, we have a very transparent process where if a bill is introduced by a certain day, it is guaranteed a hearing. That may take a lot of time. We can stay here as late as we need to, but all bills get a hearing that get introduced, even yours. So, we should respect our colleague for his idea, even if we don't agree with it. Any further questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all. We have a few opposition witnesses. One is virtual, but I'm going to start with the in-person. We have Brittany Jones from Exelon and Ann Clays from Exelon.
Did you say virtuals first? Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Ann Clace on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power in strong opposition to House Bill 1. First and foremost, we share the concerns regarding high bills and energy costs and understand your frustration. However, House Bill 1 does not address the root cause of high bills. The primary driver of high bills is supply costs, not the compensation of the hardworking men and women working every day to keep the lights on and provide our customers and your constituents with safe and reliable service. House Bill 1 undermines the Public Service Commission's roles and disrupts the long-established framework under which they oversee utility operations and costs. State law requires utilities to provide safe and adequate service, and in doing so, the PSC is responsible for setting just and reasonable rates that cover the necessary expenses, including compensation. The Commission's longstanding practice does allow utilities to recover in rates, employee salaries, and incentive compensation, but only if it's tied to customer-related goals such as safety, reliability, and performance. Finally, it should be noted that no other industry, including hospitals or insurers, face this level of legislative micromanagement of employee compensation. Utilities compete regionally and nationally for engineers, line workers, cybersecurity specialists, and emergency response professionals, those who keep the lights on and the system safe. Maintaining competitive compensation packages supports affordability rather than undermines it. When utilities cannot secure the talent needed to prevent outages, manage complex digital systems, or increase efficiency, service quality declines and costs to customers rise. Legislative and regulatory frameworks play a critical role in how investors evaluate risk. When expenses that have traditionally been recoverable are suddenly excluded, or when rules and regulations change frequently and states stand out as outliers due to their laws, investors will take notice. That uncertainty increases the level of perceived risk. And when risk goes up, the cost of capital will indeed go up as well, and those costs can be passed on to customers. May I continue quickly? Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Brittany Jones, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for BGE. I'm here today to be the voice of 1,776 employees who are all Marylanders that will be directly harmed by HB 1. Because let's be clear, this does not just impact executives. These are the employees who are working around the clock to quite literally keep the lights on and the gas flowing. Take our Director of Transmission Operations as an example. This individual leads a highly skilled team who's responsible for providing 24/7 operation of the electric system. They have to manage to avoid brownouts from occurring despite the regional grid being overloaded with demand. This particular individual, he's already worked 60+ hours from Friday to yesterday, and that pace will continue for the remainder of the week. It's important to note he's a salary employee and does not get paid overtime. Why is this important? It's important because HB 1 targets this individual and other supervisors to cap his well-earned pay that is aligned with the market to be based on that of a commissioner who's a public sector employee for a state agency. It's imperative that this committee understands that despite what you're hearing, this bill does not just target executive compensation and bonuses. It impacts all employee bonuses who are not represented by a union.
as if this isn't overreach enough, HB1 cannot even guarantee actual savings to customers. I urge you to review the PSC's testimony that clearly states this bill could have an adverse effect and actually cost customers more. If BGE chooses to move those bonuses to salary-based pay to stay competitive with the market, that will increase the amount of fixed costs that are recovered through rates. Today, incentive pay is not a guarantee, and it's only awarded to employees that have strong performance that yield customer benefit. The PSC's already determined that certain incentive compensations tied to earnings cannot be recovered through rates. It's a shareholder expense. So knowing this bill will not guarantee ratepayer savings and could do the opposite, we urge an unfavorable report.
Great. We'll bring up our virtual witness and then we'll do questions. Nicole Corona, also from Exelon.
Hey, good afternoon, Chair Corman. Sorry, due to my technical difficulties. Vice Chair Gatton, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, my name is Nicole Corona, Director of Compensation. I'm here on behalf of Exelon to respectfully oppose HB1 as currently drafted. I'm here to share at a high level how Exelon sets our compensation philosophy and why. So in order for Exelon to attract, retain, and motivate highly skilled workforce required to operate safe, reliable, and customer-focused services, we must maintain compensation programs that are competitive with our external market. We do not compete solely with other utilities. Our talent is in high demand across the general industry, technology, engineering, and other specialized sectors. To remain competitive, our programs must reflect this broader market landscape. Our total cash compensation approach, which includes base salary plus short-term incentives, is consistent with how most large employers structure pay for their critical roles. Short-term incentives are a key mechanism to focus employees on the operational outcomes that matter the most to our customers and regulators. Our goal for all employees are heavily weighted toward operating efficiencies, reliability, safety, and customer service. A reduction or a restriction in the compensation programs we provide could create unintended operational and financial impacts. In addition, a public sector functional directors operate in fundamentally different labor markets with different expectations, accountability structures, and compensation philosophies. As a result, comparing the two roles does not provide meaningful insight for compensation decisions. Even the Public Service Commission references this concern in their letter of information. Commissioners operate within public governance structures, often appointed or elected, and with accountability to citizens. While corporate functional directors are accountable for driving and contributing to enterprise performances, their pay reflects operational impact.
Great, thank you so much. First question is going to be from me. Are you familiar with the President's Executive Order 14372, prioritizing the warfighter and defense contracting?
Not off the top of my head, sir.
Okay, so this is an executive order that sets rules around compensation, including bonuses for defense contractors. So just want to make sure you update your testimony when you say no other sector is subject to anything like this. That was an executive order not done through any kind of legislative process where defense contractors got to go testify and try to shape the outcome. It was just handed down. So you might want to check that out just when you update your testimony for the Senate side. And we'll start with Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. And I want to be very concise in my question, maybe 2.5 questions.
Sure.
So it's a half a question. So you said you have about how many employees at BG&E?
So the number that I gave was about 1,700. We have a total of 3,300 employees. The amount, 1,776, represents all of our employees who are not represented by a union.
Okay, and out of that 1,776, how many make over $260,000 a year?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but that reference point is because the way the bill's written, all employees in that category, all 1,776, would not be able to have the bonus recoverable through rates, yet our union workers, which is 1,400 and some change, they would.
And do you have figures for how many are union members?
Yes. So our union's 1,456 employees who, what this bill would do is enable their bonus to be recoverable through rates, and then the non-union amount is 1,776.
Thank you. Lastly, so is it your position to believe that the bottom line of the company is affected because it's not recovered, or because this bill would hinder the ability to recover the rates, and so therefore now this company would not be able to still sustain the employees and even, and I'd hate to use this word to be sharp, but a lavish lifestyle for someone that's making over $300,000 a year, when, from what I'm gathering, based upon the figures you've provided, in juxtaposition, that it seems to be that most aren't making that much.
Correct. I think it has to do with the total compensation package and how we attract the brightest and best talent that's needed to do very complex work on an electrical system, like we said today, doing load shifting to minimize brownouts for all of our customers or constituents. It's technical stuff. We have to recruit the best of the best. So as Nicole was saying, when you look at the market range, we have base pay, but then we also incentivize performance. That's what gets us in that market range. We don't include everything in base pay because what you find is that lowers performance. If you're not doing incentive-based pay, then you're saying if you do the bare minimum, you're going to get paid this much. So by incentivizing performance, that's where we're able to get the best out of people to be able to give the best customer results. So that's why that's been recoverable through rates, because it's tied to those specific operational metrics.
And I'm very familiar, again, because I have a great understanding of the labor union. So I'm assuming that it'd be the IBEW that would be these individuals conducting most of that work. And again, I believe that we should have highly skilled, qualified people doing that work. But are the unions and or the contractors that are pulling from the union halls these individuals doing the negotiation of their salaries? Are those the ones that are really receiving that that level of compensation commensurate with their experience? Is that your?
Yeah, so as you know, being familiar with the unions, we have the collective bargaining agreement that accounts and negotiates that type of incentive-based pay. So that's all separate, negotiated through the contract terms.
Right.
What this bill impacts is everyone else. So we do believe everyone is entitled to be rewarded for strong performance and measured as such. The union contract works a little bit differently than that. But to your point too, asking about profits and would the bottom line be impacted? I think what this bill does, and what's more concerning, is it really does limit our ability to attract and compete with other employers. We have our contractors that are seeking our engineers. I can't stress enough how critical this work is from a safety and reliability perspective. So it is important we get the best and the brightest of competent people working on the system.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Ms. Cronin, we just turned off your camera to make the screen a little neater because there was a lot up there. So if you have a response on anything, we'll just bring you back up on the screen. I will turn to Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill is not limited to folks who make over $300,000 a year, is it?
That's correct.
Okay. So I used to work for Comcast, and we did a lot of storm response, a lot of those big calls where it's a lot of people on, technical people, management people. We work in tandem with groups like BG&E. Those kind of people really disappear from their families during those times. So if there's a storm, it's not just the storm, it's the wind, it's the snow, it's the cleanup. The real problem is the trees, because the trees knock down the lines, and then you've got problems throughout the whole state. Are those the kind of folks which you're speaking about when you're talking about recruitment? And, you know, it's not your union guy who is protected, but it's my aunt who's going to disappear for 5 days during a storm event. Is that the kind of person you're speaking to?
Yeah, Delegate Grammer, thank you so much for making that point. And just to be clear, everyone plays a vital role in storm restoration. The folks that are working in the field are just as important as the ones behind the scene. But to be clear, the ones working in the field have no direction of where to go, no job assignment if you don't have the folks that are doing the technical work of the job routing, looking at the system damage and isolating the incident. Right. So you're right, all of us are working around the clock for storm restoration.
Would those type of people, let's say I have to think about whether I want to disappear from my family for 4 or 5 days, and like you make 80, 90 grand, that kind of person's going to consider that, right? Am I ballparking this right?
You're right, and what's important is salary exempt employees, they're not getting paid overtime, whereas hourly employees are. So we'll be away from our families days on end, not being able to shove our own families out. However, Yeah, it's what's called upon the duty. So when you look at other competing businesses and sectors, in order for us to attract and convince someone to really want to do this work, that's where we say, you know, show up for our customers, do what's needed, think innovatively and creatively, and then maybe you get incentive-based pay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask you guys the same question that I asked Mr. Lapp. Do you have any idea how much money is invested in Exxon, BG&E, et cetera, in the Maryland pension system? And if you don't know, could you find out for us?
Yeah,
Please.
Delegate, if it's okay, I'd love to take that question too. What you're raising is a really important part. I heard throughout the conversation, this bill isn't restricting you from paying bonuses or from cap pay. It's saying you could pay another avenue through shareholders. So let's talk about who our shareholders are. We know that if we look at our stock shares, 85.77% of share ownership is held by institutional holdings. That's your 401ks, that's your pensions. If you look publicly on NASDAQ, the Maryland State Retirement Pension System has $44.4 million invested in our stock as of 9/30/2025. So when it's an easy thing to say, tap into the shareholders, but you have to remember these are retirees, these are Marylanders that want to retire in this state, and they are banking on us to continue to perform. As Mr. Lapp said, this is the slow and steady. This is not skyrocket profits or returns. This is the slow and steady, which is why it's a good investment for pensions.
Thank you.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being here. Again, I want to circle back. I think Delegate Grammer was talking a little bit about this too. So the concern is about recruitment in a lot of ways,
In
right?
a lot of ways, one of many.
But to be sure, investor-owned utilities is not the only model, even in the state of Maryland. But outside of Maryland, there's a lot of different models for utilities. I mean, there are some states that are 100% publicly owned. So do those states have trouble recruiting executives or recruiting managers and leaders? Is their service significantly worse than ours, to your knowledge? I just want to see the role that recruitment and that competition really does play.
Delegate Allen, I will say investor-owned utilities are typically like 95% of customers are served by investor-owned utilities. So that is one thing I do just want to point out, particularly in this region. So that is part of it. And I do think depending on where you are, that's where you're going to deal with the salaries and pay scales and whatnot. But I mean, I think no matter what, recruitment is going to essentially, based on, I think what Brittany was saying, our secondary roles and what we're doing, it's really going to factor into those bonuses in the pay. And as Delegate Grammer said, that is something that all of our folks are considering when you take on this job. And going back to our secondary roles, all of us have secondary roles. We are doing storm duty, right? So it's not just the ops team and whatnot going into this. Every single one of us have those secondary roles. So I think that's just one thing I did want to highlight.
And if I might add something about investor-owned utilities, if it's okay, Mr. Chair. So what's important too is as we do pilots in the General Assembly, lots of your peers around the table have come to us to say, we want to do a pilot. We want to think innovatively. We want to expand electrification. We want to do virtual power plants. You come to the investor-owned utilities because we have great talent. We also have access to capital. So investor-owned utilities are not all bad. Having that shareholder model, it really does afford us the opportunity to move Maryland forward. And what we've realized through these investments, BGE is ranked number 4 in the entire country for reliability. Shout out to Pepco, who's number 2. So this is what you get in terms of investor-owned utilities. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And then real quick too, just because it was brought up earlier, last year we passed as part of the energy bill limiting whether or not ratepayer money can be used for things like air travel and private jets. Is that the reason my bill went up this year?
No, actually, the majority of your bill increase is coming from rising supply costs that have skyrocketed in the past 2 years.
Okay, just want to make sure there wasn't a connection.
Of course, thank you.
Delegate Healy.
Chair, thank you very much. Like most of us, I'm new to this subject matter, so please bear with me.
Of course.
You said that 90% of all the public utilities are owned by the public. Is that correct?
Oh, do you want to cover that, Ian?
What did you say? Sorry?
The investor-owned utilities that held the majority as investor-owned utilities.
Right, are served by investor-owned utilities, right, of the public, yes. So it's
So-
rare to find the municipal-owned utilities. I understand where Delegate Allen was going with, but a majority of the country is served by investor-owned
And you
utilities.
said 90%.
95%, I think.
95%. Of the 5% that is investor-owned,
portion.
is that what?
Correct,
is
served,
that- Is
yes.
that the balance there?
That's correct.
So 95% of
Yeah.
all of this whole
Served.
universe of electric and gas utilities is investor-owned.
It's actually the opposite. No, so 95%. So investor-owned utilities serve 95% of the population across the country. So we are the majority. We provide service to the most customers, municipal or smaller. So like your Easton Utilities, that is just covering that little area. That's the
Okay,
distinction.
that's why I was asking, because I'm not clear, I don't understand this at all.
It's so complex.
But I thought I heard you say that it was 95 or 90% was publicly owned and not investor owned.
opposite.
So you're saying that 95% of the whole world of utilities
Is
that we're talking about
served by investor-owned
is
utilities.
investor owned?
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Of that 95%, what percent is Exelon?
Yeah. Great
And
question.
all your companies and all your, like, all your
Yeah. And
subsidiaries.
I don't have the percentage, but what I can tell you about Exelon is that we do have the most investor-owned utilities across the country. So we have ComEd in Chicago. We have ACE, Atlantic City. I believe it's 5. And
I know
then
you own a lot, so I just want to know how big a share of that is your company overall?
Yeah. First Energy is another big one that is in multiple
Yeah, we can
states.
get that, we'll get
number
that
for us
information for you.
later,
Sure, we'll get that
If you don't have it now.
Yeah, I
if
would
if
be
you
happy
could
to give
find
you.
that number and get it for us.
Absolutely.
And the other question, and it's kind of based on that too, is that you have a bird's eye view of the whole industry. Because you're so large and you're a player across the country, is this model of compensation industry-wide, or is it really select companies that focus on doing the business in this particular way?
Sure, and by that you mean the base pay versus the pay for performance model, having the bonus?
What we're talking about here, whether you have base and incentives and whatever you want to call bonuses,
Sure.
however it's structured, is that a standard way that is done across the industry, or is it some companies do it one way, some do it another?
Thank you for the question. I think we'll defer to Nicole, who is on the line, and she's our expert with compensation for Exelon.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you all can hear me. Yes, this is standard practice, as I noted, right? Not only with utilities, but also other organizations which we compete for talent for, whether it be, like your Amazon or, a local restaurant, right? We're all competing for that talent, and the majority do have a base and a short-term incentive portion.
Okay, I'm not sure what, the local restaurant has to do with, this kind of compensation. We're talking
Sorry.
about using public funds to.
I'm so
to
sorry.
help.
I did not know. That is the wrong correlation there.
Okay, so can we go back to the original question? And again, the industry standard for how these compensation packages work, is there one standard across the board, or is it different companies do it differently?
Companies do it differently. So from a compensation perspective, we connect with various organizations, various consulting firms to look at what the landscape is. So at different levels of the organization, we determine, okay, a manager typically gets X in salary and then X in a short-term incentive. Then from there, we say, from a company philosophy standpoint, what do we want to do? Do we want to be competitive with that. So say it's 10%. Do we want to offer our managers 10%? Do we want to offer them a little bit lower and give them more in base? Or opposite, maybe more pay at risk, where we give them a higher bonus and then a lower base salary. So we use external data and where we want to take the organization to determine our compensation mix, if you will. Again, that's salary versus salary and short-term incentive.
All right, thank you very much.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies, good to see you. So, you know, I'm taking a mantle from one of our former colleagues who's not here now, but I was researching with Dr. Google here for a little bit here. And so you never know what you're going to find there with that. You never know if it's going to be accurate or not. So I wanted to ask you, so I was looking up, we heard earlier that there's a bill that's basically the same in Colorado, SB 291. I took a look at that bill, and it does not appear to be the same. In fact, it appears to be quite different than what this bill is doing. So if that is the case, would this in fact be precedent setting? We also heard maybe Connecticut, maybe some other states. You know, I really want to get to the bottom of if this really is precedent and if no other state has done this, because my quick read of what Colorado did, it is not this. It's something different. There's some elements that are similar, but a lot of it is different. So I just kind of want to understand if you all know that. If you don't know that off the top of your head, I would love to get that further information, but I would like to know if this is in fact precedent setting, what we're doing here, because to me, it appears that it is.
Yeah. Yeah, we could not find any other bills. I think you're exactly right. There seems to be pieces of states that have done different pieces of this, but we could not find any other bills that were exactly similar to
And
this.
we did look into the, gosh, I can't talk, the Colorado bill. Thank you for bringing that up. And what we see in that bill is much of what the legislature did last year. So restricting private jet, limiting travel and expense, those type of parameters, but it did not institute any type of cap on base pay, and it did not restrict recovery from employees for bonuses. So thanks for bringing that up. We couldn't find anything on that.
Okay, thank you. If you wouldn't mind just kind of looking into some of those other states like Connecticut or any others that may be out there. Maybe I'm missing some, but I really would like to get to the bottom of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Naraki, you're now going to be in charge of this day in ENT history, so I hope you're ready. Now you're taking on the mantle of Google researcher. Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I have a couple of clarifying questions.
Sure.
Well, and it's first for Ms. Corona.
Yes.
Yes. So at the beginning of your testimony, you stated that you were in opposition as drafted, which means to me you're favorable with amendments. Can you tell me what your potential amendments are or changes? Or maybe
So
you
I
didn't
think
need to
there's a
say
lot
that.
of clarifications that can, I think we heard a few of them at the beginning that could be helpful to understand what the bill is trying to get at and what that means for the compensation at Exelon. So I think that's kind of where my statement is coming from, right there. I think there needs to be a lot more clarification with what is the executive defined as, or the supervisor, the cap, why are we comparing it to the commissioner's pay, et cetera.
Okay, so you'd be interested in clarifying language to then potentially support the bill, or you just oppose the bill? I just want clarification.
Sorry, yes, I oppose the bill.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions as it relates to just recovery, and I want to thank Delegate Long for beginning the conversations around my thoughts, because I thought I first heard in testimony that you didn't have any union labor, but what I hear you say is that you have union labor, and when you seek compensation from the PSC, you recover union rates, but not your non-union employee rates. And I just want to clarify what is then recovered. And so your general employee who's a union-based employee who is just, I'm assuming, a salaried employee, if they then have to work 40 hours plus a week, it's a storm or there's a major project, you're doing tunneling or you're replacing lines, because that will be tied to a performance or some type of metric that's already been submitted or for a plan, you would submit to the PSC reimbursements for that?
I would love to answer that. Thank you, Delegate Boyce, for the question. So I think it's first really important to level set today's practices. So today's practices, labor expenses is considered an operating and maintenance expense, O&M, and that's dollar for dollar cost recovery, regardless if you're a union employee or if you're a non-represented employee. So just the base pay, what we're earning, or even overtime pay, which are non-exempt employees like a union person gets, all of that gets recovered through rates because it's an operating expense.
Sure.
Dollar for dollar. What this bill separating is saying, okay, if you're a represented employee, your bonus can still get recovered through rates as it's happening today.
I'm sorry, Ms. Jones.
Sure.
I know that, but I'm trying to clarify why the other 1776 would not be, you're saying under this bill, they
Under
would
this
not be
bill.
repealed, but what makes them different from the union
We're trying to figure that out too.
employees? Okay.
That's what's in the bill. That's the concern, is that then you have the other subset of employees, just because they're not represented by the union. This bill makes that distinction that their bonus could no longer be recovered through rates.
Okay, and then when you're, again, recovering bonuses, and I'm just trying to think about this as like a line-to-line.
Sure.
Itemized, or, you know, it's the big storm that just happened. Maybe some lines came down because of ice. Now you have to get, whether it's the union or the contracted individuals, to go out there overtime to clear that. That is something you would then recoup from the, as a permission from the PSC, because it has to do with performance, it has to do with service.
Correct.
Okay, so I guess what I am trying to get at is, and I know some of the bills that have been talked about, whether it's Connecticut or Colorado, have been talking about, I guess like the bill last year, that there are more line items, items that cannot be recuperated. So if it's a supervisor, and I thank Delegate Stein for bringing that up, you were saying supervisors, which is not necessarily a C-suite or an executive, would not be able to be quote unquote compensated. And I guess I'm trying to get to is what isn't. So it's give us some more specific examples of what is recuperated.
Sure.
Right, and so it's bonuses for general employees, it's the overtime for services, it's the pipe replacements, it's the trees, give us some more examples of that, and then I have a follow-up.
Happy to. So just if you think in terms of compensation, a competitive compensation package, currently it includes base pay and it also includes those important incentives, which are called bonuses. All of that's recoverable today through rates.
Sure.
So that's recoverable. Here's a really important point to understand too. The commission has exercised their authority to have discretion to say what can be recoverable when we think of employee incentives versus what can't. So what is recoverable are those bonuses that are tied to operational performance, which I know we covered. But what is not recoverable, what the commission has already said we cannot recover through rates, is any incentive compensation that's tied to net income, earnings per share, or Exelon stock price. That is exclusively already recovered through shareholders. So I think that's a really important distinction, that we already have that protection today. And then when you think of base pay compensation, this is having a cap in place, but today it's dollar for dollar cost recovery for compensation.
So if you seek 1.2 million, we pay 1.2 million.
Well, no, the commission never really approves 100% of what we go in for.
That's just an example.
Yes, yes.
It's because if it's dollar for dollar.
Dollar for dollar.
1.2, we pay 1.2.
Correct.
Okay, so why would an executive, just because this is where this conversation has been talking about, why would an executive who respectfully is not on the ground doing the work that we would say, sure, somebody's been in the cold all weekend, they're in the rain all weekend, fixing lines and pipes or whatever, would get their bonus? Why would an executive get a bonus for performance?
That's a great question. So the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, is directly responsible for the performance of the 3,300 men and women who work for BGE. They hold the scorecard. They are leading the teams. They're holding their executive team accountable. Everything rolls up to them. They have accountability. If you think in terms of safety, not just our employees, but our contractors, every single person that works on the system, we have to have 0 OSHA recordables, as an example. We have to send people home the same way they came to work. That's a huge responsibility. And quite frankly, our CEOs, they're on 24/7 because we're a 24/7 operation. So their pay is truly earned. And if you look at the benchmarks of what other CEOs for Fortune 200 companies that have substantial economic output for the region and how much we give back in taxes and charitable workforce development, I mean, it's right on par. These are big jobs.
Then why not just increase their salary to the workload versus giving them compensation for work you say that they are doing on behalf of service performance, especially if we're paying for dollar. So if they make 1.2, but they end up getting another bonus in $1 million and I have to pay for it, why not just have the company pay them $2 million? And then we can really, I mean, if this is about making sure the folks who are on the ground doing the work get compensation for doing the gritty work, right? When people are calling saying, my power's not out, go cut down this tree, whatever it is, fix these lines, that those are the people that we do take care of and that are paid for, versus saying every time, you know, this person over here cuts down the tree and fixes the lines, the executive gets the quote-unquote performance when you can just increase his salary and then we don't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah, just one important distinction to make. If we increase the salary, because that is an avenue, and if we do that, that's going to make it even more expensive for ratepayers, because that salary-based pay, that would also get recovered through rates, and then you wouldn't have that performance mechanism to say, hey, CEO, if you don't deliver and keep our folks safe and keep reliability on, like over the weekend at Max, we had 1,200 customers without power. Other states had 300,000+ without power. If they're not hitting those marks, then they shouldn't get that type of incentive. So the incentive pay is not guaranteed, whereas if you move it all to salary, that's fixed prices that the customers would pay. So that's why we're really not advocating for that, because we don't think it helps customers.
I don't know. Either way, we're paying. Sorry.
Thank you.
Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being up here. So a couple of just kind of numbers questions. What is the example that you gave earlier about, I don't want to say lineman, but somebody out there in the cold working over the weekend, working long hours, what does their base salary generally look like?
I don't have that information off the top of my head.
What about what their salary, what their bonus structure might look like?
Yeah, that's all. So if they're line workers, that's negotiated in the collective bargaining agreement. So I wouldn't be privy to that information.
But the individual that you were describing earlier, do you have any idea generally what they might be making?
Yeah, Nicole on the line with compensation might be able to give more of a pay range scale if we maybe use the example of an engineer. So an engineer is more behind the scenes that's looking at the system, assigning work.
Are you trying to get off mute? Yes, and just as an FYI, our salary ranges are within our job postings on our site as to align with the Transparency Act. So an engineer, right? That is a higher level engineer. This engineer would require a master's degree and have years of experience, right? 8+ years of experience. Their salary range is anywhere between $122,000 to $168,000.
Okay, thank you. And so a follow-up, what is the current salary for the executives at BG&E and or Exelon? Like what is their base pay plus their bonuses? I know we've heard a lot of numbers thrown around, but can you tell me what their base pays are plus their bonuses? Like what are they pulling in every year, generally speaking?
I'm not privy to that information, and it would probably just be the market range since these are confidential data points. Nicole, do you have an answer for that?
There would be a large range. I don't know if I have that range in front of me, just because, right, how are we defining executives? So I wouldn't want to throw anything out at the moment, but we can definitely get back to you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to drill down a little on these numbers too, with respect to employees. So you said there were 1,700 plus employees that would be affected by this. Let me ask you, of those 1,700 employees, you said they're not covered by the union contract, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So sorry,
But of
just
those 1,700,
BGE.
excuse me?
Sorry, so those are the BGE employees, to be clear, and then we have the PEPCO employees as well.
Okay.
So there's an additional.
So how many of those employees, whatever that number is, what's the total number?
So for PHI, PEPCO employees, we have about 3,900 employees, and then within the PEPCO service territory, we're talking about 1,500 or so.
1,500 plus 1,700?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds pretty substantial. But let me ask you this question.
Sure.
So of those employees, and I'm going to quote directly from the bill, all right, is it your testimony that every one of those employees would be affected by this?
By the bonus.
By this bill?
By the bonus.
By the
Their
bonus or
would-
the compensation?
No, I didn't say the compensation. That's capped at 110% and is limited explicitly to supervisors. This one for the 1,700 plus, that is focusing on their bonus would not be recoverable through rates, because in the bill it says employees, no distinguishing factor to executives or supervisors.
So it's just the bonus that would be affected?
Correct.
Not the compensation?
There would be probably a subset of that 1,700, but I don't have that breakdown of how many of those would be impacted by that 110% cap for compensation.
Well, it's the 110% cap, but it also is very clear about who is affected, and it's not anybody that's not covered by a union contract. It's a supervisor, and it's defined in the bill as using the individual's independent judgment and is authorized to hire, transfer, suspend, lay off, recall, promote, et cetera, and is responsible for directing the work performance, and is responsible for responding to employee complaints, and is employed as a bona fide executive capacity under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So it's like not just non-union employees. Sure. It's a supervisory, much narrower definition of that.
We agree with that point.
Okay.
That's for the 110% compensation.
Right.
Where the distinguishing factor, the disparity is with bonuses that are recoverable. The union employees are protected, but the remaining 1,700 plus are not from that provision of the bill.
All right, so it's just their bonuses, but you could put it in their compensation without having to do that unless they were, you could put their compensation through without having to, you could put their compensation through rates unless they were supervisors under that definition, correct?
Right, we could do base rates, but that's what the commission warns in their letter. That would increase fixed cost that are all recoverable through customers.
Okay. Because, the number you have that the BG&E has that would be saved seems small.
It is very small.
Well, but given the universe that you're talking about a huge group of people, you seem to be saying it's very high, that it's a big cost.
I think we're saying that this is really impactful to our employees who are Marylanders, who are contributing to the local economy and trying to make ends meet too, that it's impactful from that regard. But yes,
I understand. Thank you. Let me ask you another question. Sure. So right now, you are prohibited from recovering any costs through rates that are associated with membership, dues, sponsorship, contributions to an industry trade association, or related entity exempt under 501c6 of the Internal Revenue Code. Do you still do that? Do you still pay membership to those traders?
No, that's a shareholder expense. We always comply with the law.
Do you pay them?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. It's also, you're also prohibited from passing through rate to rate payers the acquisition, use, or allocation of costs associated with a private plane that is owned or leased by the company or its holding company. Do you still do that?
Yes, but we don't pay those costs.
I understand you don't pass them through. Where do you get the money to pay those costs?
Our shareholders.
Shareholders. Thank you. And you referenced Fortune 200 companies and incentives through stock price that you said you also pay through shareholders, right? Through shareholder. You referenced earlier another incentive.
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
That is related to stock price. The other Fortune 200 companies that you referenced, you said other Fortune 200 companies, How many of those have a monopoly? And operate in a monopoly market, a regulated monopoly market?
I would say
like
other
utility
investor-owned
companies?
utilities. I'd
Yeah.
have
How
to
many of those are
research
there
that.
roughly?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'd have to get
But
back to you.
it's a subset of the Fortune 200 companies, right? Yeah, so my point is that isn't it true that other Fortune 200 companies pay these costs through their shareholder earnings?
Yeah, I would say that they have different cost structures, different mechanisms. So that's why you see a lot, like if we look at competitive generators, their supply, their profits are able to fluctuate with the market. We're heavily regulated as a monopoly. So every dollar we have to go before the commission to earn that justification for recovery. So when you try to shift too much to shareholders, and again, that point of who the shareholders are, that's where we have to really lean in and make sure this is a balanced perspective that's keeping the financial health of the business of the utility, because as my colleague said earlier, if we have our credit rating that drops, it makes it more expensive to borrow capital, which again, that hits ratepayers. So it all comes full circle, which is why we're just saying we really need to work together, make sure we're thinking of policy holistically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for your testimony and for hanging out with us. We've been asking you a lot of questions, but we got to get up to speed on this subject matter, so thank you. Let me also say, Ms. Jones, that it's always a pleasure to see you, because whenever my constituents have issues in my district, like with the tree on Northeast Avenue that had to come down and the neighbors were upset, you always showed up to help. You always showed up and you got your crews, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I'm remembering that as I'm about to ask you this question.
Of course.
Because we're all people here. But, you know, part of what's so challenging about this subject matter, energy costs and how this industry works, is the larger context. And we all have heard stories about the differential between worker compensation and CEO compensation. And 50 years ago, they were maybe 20 times apart, but now it's like almost 300 times. CEOs make almost 300 times on average. For the top S&P 500 companies, they make 300 times more than the average worker. And people are really feeling that right now, particularly as they see their pocketbooks getting hit harder by energy costs. So we're in a position, we got to think creatively. How do we, at the same time, compensate talented, creative problem solvers for their incredible contributions? Like, we all want people to be compensated. And so we all have an interest in that as well. So I sort of following on Delegate Boyce's question about, you know, what makes sense? Where might there be a place of consensus where we're not looking at a 300 times differential between average workers and CEOs, while average workers are seeing costs rise? You know, to the extent that we have jurisdiction over some of the compensation provisions of the energy monopolies in our state, what would you recommend we try differently? And just put yourself outside of your personal position, but think about what it's like for us to sit here and try to solve that problem, square that circle for our constituents.
Yeah, Delegate, thank you so much. I mean, thank you for coming from a place of empathy, and we're right there with you. We hear from our customers day in, day out that they're struggling to pay the bills. We have our own families or those situations. So truly, we're right there with you, and we're all focused on affordability. When we look at what a bill like this could even do for customers, the best case scenario, and that's if you go after executive compensation, you slash the bonuses, the best case scenario we're looking at is $1.70 savings, $1.70, best case scenario. The commission said you can't even really confirm that. The fiscal note can't confirm that. So this is our best guess. What really makes the difference on these bills and how we help with affordability is increasing generation in the state. But there's also a lot of other opportunities where we want you to know that The utilities are here to be a partner with solutions. I look at my own personal bill, the Empower Maryland program's a good example. If you look at the surcharge on customer bills, mine last month was $19 just for the program, not for the cost of the service or the energy or anything. So if we come together and we really look at these programs and think more creatively, those changes is what's going to drive down bills. Doing something like this, while novel, well-intended, of course, it just doesn't help with the affordability crisis we're facing.
Thanks for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Just want to remind folks, we do have another witness after this as well. Delegate Grammer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to see how, for example, a utility like BGE was defined in law. Where can I find that?
Public service company is the definition, and public utilities article is where pretty much everything and anything electric companies is located.
You know what part of the public services article?
I will find that. Oh, do I know what public services
No,
are?
do you know
How it's
what
defined?
Article 3102?
It's a huge article.
If you don't know it, I can find it.
I don't know, but I will get that for you.
Thank you.
Delegate, we think it's in 1-101, the definitions. Thank you. But if you can't find it, Steve can help you. Delegate Long, second bite at the apple.
Mr. Chair, it's my first second bite of the session. I appreciate you. Very quickly, and again, we're drinking from a fire hose here, so I appreciate you all being here. And again, I hope I don't sound prosecutorial in my approach, and I appreciate both of you for your time as we're all trying to help Marylanders, right? But back to the union piece, just one last question. Is this a Davis-Bacon wage rate that they're receiving, prevailing wage? How are you all defining that? Because from my understanding, generally speaking, when there's union labor on site, that depends on what project, they're not receiving bonuses. So if you could just help me understand that, or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, I mean, that's a labor relations question. What I can say, the law requires us to pay prevailing wage, so we're doing that. And we also ensure that our contractors of choice are paying that to their contractors. So required by law, we're in compliance. Nicole, I don't know, because your compensation, I don't know if you would have the information about bonuses for union on all jobs, or if there's, I think all that goes to the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, that would be detailed in the collective bargaining agreement. I would need to look at that. That's not under my purview, so I don't want to misspeak on that.
Thank you. If I can get that data, I'd really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, all three of you, for your testimony, and please thank all the folks who worked through the storm to mostly keep our lights on. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions. Thank you.
We will now call up Benjamin Baker from the Maryland Public Service Commission for informational testimony. And I do want to note that Chair Barbe wanted to be here, but he had a health conflict, but you know he loves to see us, so I'm sure he'll be back soon.
All right. Hello, my name is Ben Baker, Senior Commission Advisor with the Maryland Public Service Commission. As we've been speaking about, HB 1 establishes restrictions on the inclusion of bonuses for non-union utility workers and base rates going forward, and caps on supervisor pay tied to the maximum commission salary plus 110%. Today, the commission does review when the utility comes in for a base rate case. We review basically their bonus structure and determine if that is appropriate for inclusion in base rates. Also, witnesses may also review employee compensation in terms of if that is also appropriate for recovery in base rates. You have our testimony that kind of goes over some pros and cons of the legislation. I do want to point out, I think a number of times it said that we are saying that this will increase rates. That is not what our testimony said. This bill does create an opportunity for base rates to come down, but as Delegate Crosby discussed, there are ways for utilities to potentially reset their compensation structure in a manner that would not result in the same decrease and possibly lead to it being, I'll say, more fixed in a manner whereby the salaries can fluctuate year to year. With that, I'm available for questions.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question from Delegate Healy.
How all these different things work together. The Public Service Commission, when they look at a rate case, how much leeway do you have that, I mean, some of it has got to be like you're required to do certain things, and some of it you must have some judgment to make. I mean, when somebody brings a case to you, are there things that you must accept from the utility as a legitimate cost, and then some things that you may be able to say that's too high or too low or whatever?
So all utility costs are subject to, are subject to our review and review for approval into base rates. That said, rate cases are a time-limited proceeding that has a lot of material in it with a lot of expert witnesses. And so really the utility books are opened up and those witnesses are going through and looking at various items in it to say, does this seem reasonable? If they see an increase they might be looking for, does that increase track with a reasonable growth? If they think there's questions about it, they will basically question those spends. They will write up testimony and submit it to us. And we basically go through a court case looking through all this expert testimony to determine if what the utility has requested is appropriate or not. But to your question, I would say every time the utility shows up, all their spend is basically up for grabs. There are certain constitutional questions about going back for things that have previously been approved for inclusion.
Okay, so let me just follow up quickly, because what I'm trying to get at is, are you subject to, like the general public being upset about, you're going to raise my bill by 25%, and I can't afford that, and why are you letting them do that to us? And can you legally or under your authority say you're right, they should only get 5%? I'm just making numbers up, okay? Just so I can understand what you're doing here.
I have not seen us stress test the idea that rates are too unaffordable, therefore zero increase. So typically you're going based off the utilities books and what the utilities have spent and their reasoning for that spend in service of the public and what is going on, what says we can and can't do inside this public utility article. So just to say, now if we were to look at the going economic trends and everyone's saying, well, you're asking for this increase that doesn't seem to align with what everyone else is experiencing, let's go through this. That's part of the determination, but I couldn't just simply say 5% seems too high. No, that could get us into legal problems.
Okay, okay, last question, Mr. Chair. The public service, do you act more like a judge, like an administrative judge, or more like a legislator where you actually solicit from the public and hear all sides before you make a decision?
Both. So it's quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative in nature.
Okay.
So the bench, so we have public hearings to hear from the public about the rate increase, and so that is part of our hearings. And then part of that is also expert witness testimony that we have to review. And then we issue a decision based off of all the above. When this is happening, after we issue an order, if somebody doesn't like what we've done, they can sue us up through the courts, and they will go through that and say, were you within your statutory authority to make the decisions that you made?
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ben, thanks for being here. This is really just to confirm what the chair is saying. Chair Barve is saying in his letter that the commission's established policy is to review bonuses for which utilities are requesting allowance as in their rates for whether the bonuses relate to financial performance, in which case the commission will disallow that. But if they're related to customer-related goals, safety, reliability, et cetera, then the commission would typically allow that bonus. And that's your precedent and policy moving forward.
Correct. That is how we have treated bonus compensation in our rate cases. Just to clarify, when they show up, they're basically saying previously, this is the size of the bonuses we've been given out and the metrics we use to give those bonuses. And that is used to say, when we set the base rates, how that can influence the set rate going forward. How they manage their business after I say the rate is set is up to them in terms of if they will have the money or not to pay those bonuses. But so they're not coming back to us every single year saying, well, this is what I did this year for bonuses. I want to make sure that's clear in case anyone was getting that impression from the previous testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here. How does the PSC currently monitor, assess bonuses and compensation to, the aforementioned organizations?
So in the rate case, so when they show up for the rates, that's when their books are open and the witnesses are going through and saying, let me look at the last couple of years, let me maybe look at the last 5 years of bonuses that were handed out, how much was handed out, what were the reasons for it being handed out, and that's what will be debated.
Unilaterally, you do this currently. It was mentioned in a previous panel that you do a lot of these assessments broadly for compensation and bonuses.
Yeah, so the compensation is less litigated within the rate case. I was asking one of our accountants about what he goes through. So he was explaining his process, but that will be unique to each witness. But there are questions asked about what are you compensating, trying to understand how that compares to the market and what's going on within the utility request for rates.
How does this bill differ from what you currently do?
I think it just sets a strict standard for what can and can't go in. So today we would have the leniency to say yes or no. This would say for this group of employees, no. This group of employees, yes. So I think that's probably the big difference between what is happening today versus what this bill would set up, because it would say, we've set up kind of a structure that we go through. This bill would say, this is what is truly allowed and what is not allowed. So It draws a bright line.
So you currently have the authority for bonuses and compensation broadly?
Yes, and I will say on compensation, I guess all else being equal, we would see what would happen in a rate case. I would be a little, I don't think that the cap that is being proposed for supervisor pay in the way it is being proposed would probably happen within a base rate case.
Okay.
But that would be a debate within the case by the expert witnesses.
You also brought up a point that I had not thought of previously. So you said up until now, you don't consider who is in and who is out. So currently, there is no differentiation between union pay, and this would take them out.
I think that, so that's fair. We do, talking to the accountant, when he's reviewing, let's say, salaries, he is looking at what's the union getting, what is a manager getting. But that seemed like when I was discussing it with him, it seemed more like a broad view of the world. The bonuses, yeah, I don't think we're typically getting into what does this employee get for a bonus. I will ask to verify that, but I don't think that is something we typically get into the nitty gritty on.
Fair enough, but just to be clear, going forward, if we pass this would exclude consideration of union compensation.
So basically union bonuses would still be something on the table for recovery and rates. For all other bonuses for employees after a specific date that's in the bill, those would be things that we could not allow into base rates.
That's the in and out you were referring to.
That's the in and out.
So we're making, they're out, they're in.
Right.
Thanks.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one question. I want to read to you a line in some of the testimony that was submitted by Chair Barve here, because I would like to get clarification on what this means. So I'm looking at kind of the second to last paragraph. There's a line in here that says, additionally, to the extent that the bill's provisions present talent attraction and retention issues for the utilities resulting from capped compensation, it could decrease the quality of service being provided to the ratepayers. In the real world, what does that mean? What does that mean of the service being decreased to the ratepayers?
So it depends on the broad, I think it's kind of what the utilities were just discussing. When they go out to hire talent, they're going to survey the market, determine what you need to pay to attract a certain quality of candidate, and that's what they're going to try and pay. So if you don't, if that is devoid from that practice, there is a chance that maybe they have a slightly harder time attracting talent. Now, my understanding is this bill is trying, and I think maybe I missed the part about executives when we were looking it over, but I believe this bill is trying to get more to executives than it is trying to get to the traditional supervisors. So that will now narrow that concern a bit. That said, yes, I'm not going to pretend to know what goes into deciding what a C-suite person should be making and the benefit of a company, but typically that is in most companies, I believe, that is your highest paid employee or one of your highest paid employees for the leadership and whatever else they're bringing to the table. Whether we agree with that or not, that just seems to be how the market has been playing out naturally. So that would be, I guess that is the risk that is being discussed. Or if you can't pay bonuses and the utilities are unable to figure out how to increase base pay, that could also potentially have a minor risk there as well. Once again, this is all part of that overall bubble. Maybe they will take it out of the shareholder monies. Maybe they will choose to change their methods. I guess that remains to be seen.
Sure. But specifically, does that mean reliability issues? Does that mean, we're in the midst of recovering from winter storm? Does that mean restoration of power? Like, what does that mean when we're talking about potentially decreased service? I'm kind of just looking in a broad sense what that means.
Right. Depends on it will depend ultimately which workers are impacted. So if we're talking about union workers, which they are not under this, which is going to be your linemen, probably not. Now, your linemen move up through the ranks, become senior vice presidents and all that jazz, in which case they probably start getting impacted by this bill. And so to the extent that you are unable to retain your talent there, however that then trickles through, which I guess could be quality or other parts of service, that is a chance. I'm not going to say it's definitively going to happen, but you do have a risk if you are not, in whatever business you run, that if you can't hire the certain candidate that you want, that could be a problem. I'm not saying that's definitively going to happen here, but there is a risk.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That concludes the bill here on HB1. Thank you all for the terrific discussion. I thought it was a really good deep dive. Subcommittee announcements, Chair Fraser Hidalgo.
Thank you. Subcommittee will meet on Zoom at 6 o'clock. Sorry to mess up your dinners, but subcommittee will meet on Zoom at 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. We are adjourned. I'm sorry, Delegate Stein.
I don't know.
Chair Stein.
Chair Fraser Hidalgo, how long, if you had to guess how long the subcommittee will meet, what would be a reasonable guess?
I don't know. Could be my guess is 20 minutes, but I don't know. I mean, if you're asking me to answer a question,
Okay. Well, Environment Subcommittee will meet immediately after the end of the Energy Subcommittee meeting. We'll meet in the conference room. It'll be quick, I promise. What's that?
Sorry, guys. All right, so the Energy Subcommittee is going to meet. The Environment Subcommittee, I think, is having an informal meeting in the conference room after that. Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.